I'm Matt Landau, and this is Unlocked, Season 6, Magic Zones. Today's episode is brought to you by Point Central, the leader in smart home automation, and Breezeway, the industry's top property care and operations platform. Today we're talking with Carl Shepard, the co-founder of Homeaway, and one of the original brains behind the vacation rental movement as we know it. Carl has a unique perspective on the industry, both from the bottom up and from the top down. His deep understanding of where the online version of our industry started makes for powerful predictions on where we're going next. Let's get into it. Hi, Carl.
Hi, Matt. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, I'm hanging in with the pandemic. I'm sick of my four outside walls, but other than that, life is good.
And you also have your health check passed for the platform that we're recording on, so that feels even better, right?
That and my vaccine make me a triple threat, I think.
And you didn't have to fix your hair since this is only audio, right?
Yes, I can be dressed just as sloppily as I typically am these days.
This is why we like the medium of podcasting, especially the hair thing for those of us who are follically challenged. Do you listen to podcasts, Carl?
I do not listen as much as I should. I have listened to a couple that I've been involved with, and my children keep telling me I should do that. And I think, well, yeah, but I never did like listening to radio either. However, I have been thinking more and more about the types of things that I can get on my car. In my car, I drive back and forth to Dallas a lot. So having podcasts instead of country music radio might be a better thing.
It is a very engaging kind of relationship with the listeners, I must say. Folks say that they've been listening to me all afternoon for hours in the car, and I think to myself that sounds miserable. But it is quite an intimate, something that blog posts can't quite achieve, you know?
I would think that your significant other would probably think that is a challenge for them as well.
Well, as you may have guessed, I am officially significant other-less. So I got to work on that part. Maybe it has to do with the podcasting.
You first have to be able to leave your house.
This is the first step to finding a significant other. Carl, I want to start with some very, very basic stuff. For those who don't know you, you are one of the co-founders of Homeaway, which I'm curious, back in 2005, how did you guys think of Homeaway? Was it just like a immediate spark, or was this something that was being discussed over time and you realized it was worth pursuing?
I had just taken a company public called Hoover's Online and sold it to Dun & Bradstreet. And I had decided not to work for a while. And I was consulting from time to time with my friends at Austin Ventures, which is a large venture capital firm that was active from the 80s until the late 2010s here in Austin. And they introduced me to a guy named Brian Sharples because he was their CEO in residence at the time. And they were looking at a business in Houston that was a business information company. He and I were going to go look at this together because I had a business information background and he didn't. Brian, of course, at that time had been the CEO of a public company, and he had also taken 2 years off after selling his company. So we're sitting in a Starbucks discussing this dreadful company in Houston. And I just said, oh my God, every day you're going to wake up in Houston working in this? Really? Is that what you want to do just for money? And Brian said, no, what I'd really like to do is figure out something. My wife and I like to travel via vacation rental, and we'd like to figure out how to make that easier. And I said, gee, that's interesting. I like to do that too. My wife and I only use vacation rentals because our kids are so far apart. And we sit there for the next hour sort of jamming about how much we had to do to rent vacation rentals because it was so effortful, our wives simply wouldn't do it. They might plan everything else about the trip, but they weren't going to worry about a house. and we thought we could solve that problem. So that was the spark. And I went in to work with him on the side while Austin Ventures was looking at other things for him. And I just began overturning all the rocks to see where the dead were buried in the vacation rental industry. And to make a very long story short, we discovered that there were 4 companies in the United States: Cyber Rentals, Great Rentals, A1 Vacation, and VRBO, who each had entered this business. Cyber Rentals was, interesting fun fact, Cyber Rentals is ground zero in the vacation rental online industry. That is the one.
Wow. The original.
And Dave Klaus, who founded VRBO, was like the 10th advertiser on Cyber Rentals. And the people who founded A1 Vacations were like the 15th advertisers. And the people who founded Great Rentals were like the top 100. So they all knew each other. And that was the core of the online vacation rental industry at the time.
And there was also like this whole offline world going on in bulletin boards and school. This was not necessarily new. It was new to online.
It was new to online. I think Cyber Rentals is instructive because Hunter Melville and Dave Bollinger are the 2 founders of Cyber Rentals, and they were college friends, or actually friends from like 8th grade. And what they did was they published a magazine of every vacation rental in New England. And Hunter used to call it a magazine. I looked at it and called it, horrible. But it was a publication that they would publish quarterly. And then Dave and Hunter would leave for a week, leave their wives and kids, and get in a car and drive around New England and deliver this freebie all across New England where people would pick it up, right? And they were all rent by owner properties. Managed properties didn't participate in that process. Managed properties in 2004 were going in a completely different direction. I think a wrong-headed direction, but it was a completely different direction. Cyber Rentals just took its offline publication and put it online, and it began to get traction. And lo and behold, when you put something online, people find you, right? And these sites were growing astronomically. We went to look at them. We went to meet them because, coming from Hoover's, my background was that we covered at Hoover's the 15,000 most interesting companies in the world, the companies that people looked at the most. But we leased from Dun & Bradstreet and Dow Jones snippets of information about every business in the world, right? So that we could have an answer no matter if you were looking for the head of GE or if you were looking at the owner of your Tom's Texaco at the street corner. And I wanted to take that same sensibility into what Brian and I were doing. So we went to meet these 4 companies: VRBO, Cyber Rentals, Great Rentals, and
A1.
A1, sorry. Sorry, Brian Raub. Forgot you there. But we went to meet them simply because I wanted to license their content. I couldn't believe that these little sites were profitable. I couldn't believe that they were real businesses. They looked so insignificant and poorly thought out.
Right.
We went up to meet them. They used to play poker together once a quarter, and we went to a poker game.
This is like the thing of vacation rental legend.
It is absolutely true. So they were in Depot Bay, Oregon, playing poker. Their wives were all going out shopping, and the guys were playing poker. They did this once a quarter, and we showed up there to show our little business plan and to ask them if we could license their content. And Brian, I don't know if you've ever met Brian, but Brian is Central Casting CEO. Great smile, perfect teeth, flat stomach. I hate him. It's just like everything about Brian is that he's
Gravitas.
He's a heavy. He's a true heavy, and he's pleasant and charming. And he made the presentation, and one of the wives began to cry during our presentation, because our presentation was simply saying, we've raised $50 million. We're coming into the vacation rental industry. We're going to build this product that we're going to define for you, and we'd like to license your content, and we will send you traffic. And I later asked her why she started to cry. And she said, because I knew at that moment that money had found the vacation rental industry and our lives as we knew them were over.
Wow. A generational shift in a way. And I think we've been through a couple of those over the past few decades. In fact, the time that I was first introduced to your team was back at the first conference that I ever spoke at. Homeaway was the first company to ever pay me to come and speak at a conference. It was in 2013. I looked through my emails. It was in Phoenix. You remember that conference?
I do.
And there was something sort of particular that I was wondering back at the time that I never really got the answer to. And it has to do with my general theme of expertise in the vacation rental sector, which is marketing, and more specifically, a method that we call listing site independence, which is all about building a brand for your vacation rental business so that you're not totally reliant upon any given channel. And Homeaway, as that channel, gave me the chance to speak in front of all of their users. And my curiosity was, how does a company like Homeaway talk privately behind closed doors about owners and managers building their own brands?
I think I can't speak for the new owners of Verbo, but while we were there, we were totally supportive of that. I mean, I think people misunderstood a lot about the professional managers in particular, misunderstood Homeaway from like the first day. And they saw us as enemies, because if you go back to that point in time, Matt, I tell people I didn't realize that I was entering into the world of the Hatfields and the McCoys, where they hated each other, and that owners had built the online business. I mean, just like Airbnb would show later, it was individual owners who drove the creation of the online vacation rental industry. And it was precisely because property managers were, I like to call them roach motels. They wanted, you had to go into their service. You had to only use them. You had to not allow for any of your friends to ever stay in your home. You could only be there 2 weeks a year. You had to give them all your inventory. And the owners looked over there and said, yeah, that's great, except I bought this vacation home because I love this vacation home. I want to use it 50% of the time, and every property manager wants me to give it to them for all but 2 weeks. You know, I'm perfectly aware of the IRS regulation that says that if you use it for more than 2 weeks, you can't deduct it, right? You can't deduct the expenses of it. But my property manager doesn't seem to care about that. He wants me to do all this stuff. He wants to be in control. And I would talk to property managers back in 2005, and I'd say, why? And it would be because our owners will go around us. They will rent the properties themselves. And they would talk about their owners in such disparaging terms. And I'm going, dude, without these owners, you don't have a business.
And that's still true to this day.
It's just true.
They're still the primary stakeholders.
They are the stakeholders. They are the asset holders. They are the capital that drives the vacation rental industry, with the exception of Airbnb, and we can talk about that later. But in the true 100% hardcore vacation rental industry, without owners, you are nothing. So the owners started the internet businesses. And what I couldn't convince property managers of, no matter what data we would put in front of them, is that everything you say about rent by owner is false. You say that rent by owners undercut your prices. That's not true. They charge the same amount of money as you do. You say that individual owners will refuse guests, and that's not true. All they want to do is talk to them before they rent their $500,000 house to them. and they are not paying taxes. Yes, the vast majority of them are paying taxes. Some are not, but the main reason people weren't paying taxes is that their accountants didn't even know that these were subject to hotel taxes. So there were all sorts of things you could say about the industry, but the number one thing that they would not believe, and I don't know if it's still true today, but when we ask our travelers to express a preference, would you rather stay in a home represented by the owner or a property manager? Of the people who expressed a preference, the 40% did not. Of the 60% who expressed a preference, 85% preferred by owner properties. And I couldn't make the folks understand that you, property managers, understand you need to study why that's true.
Right. It sounds to me almost like they weren't actually aware of the value that they were bringing to that relationship if they weren't able to put a finger on it.
Exactly.
Folks, listen really carefully here to what Carl's saying. No matter what size your vacation rental company is, your magic zone or sweet spot is created by conveying ownership, even if you're managing someone else's property. Why? Because when booking a vacation rental, guests want individuality. There's no way around it.
Because we started up as a rent by owner company, property managers for a long time mistrusted us. But it wasn't that we were trying to suppress their brands. We were trying to improve conversion for our owners at all times. It did no good if you came to Homeaway and we didn't rent you something. If you didn't find something, that's a loss for us because we've had to pay for that in some way. So we needed to optimize it.
But are you as Homeaway not talking about the costs that it is required to generate a lead and the potential leakage in that lead actually not booking through the platform, instead going around the platform?
Yeah, we talked about that all the time. But remember, at the beginning of this industry, no one charged by the lead. They charged. We charged for a fire hose. We sent you everything you could need.
I had a couple of those fire hoses for my own vacation rentals down there in Panama, and they were quite a wonderful investment.
Right. We were a hugely had a huge return on investment. What that didn't allow, though, is that it made it very efficient for property owners who had one or two properties. But if you had 20, it was a problem. If you had 100, it was a huge problem. And it took us a long time to say, okay, we have. You have to remember that as a company, it's growing. And in our early years, we were growing 85 to 90% a year in terms of revenue, in terms of users, in terms of properties. We were just blowing and going. And it's that to stop and suddenly try to organize the professional managers who hated us made no sense. We had to drink from our own fire hose of demand and keep satisfying that demand. And it wasn't, I can't even remember the year, but it was it was after 2010 that we turned ourselves and said, we have so many property managers who are faking it and pretending to be homeowners and put one of their properties up. It became a real problem for us from the standpoint that a property manager put 10 properties up and they had 100. And then when the traveler tried to rent that house, they felt like they were being baited and switched because the guy was just trying to get leads.
Right.
So we have to address that. And the way we decided to do that was we went to the owners of then the dominant vacation rental management software. And we said, we need to partner with you. And that became difficult to do. One of them was close to bankruptcy. Another was simply not particularly interested in investing in his business any longer. And there were several others that we were dealing with. So we thought, if these companies go out of business, if these software companies go out of business, this industry is screwed. So we bought them.
And now a word from our sponsors. This episode's brought to you by Point Central, the leaders in smart home automation. But instead of me telling you how great I think they are or reading off some kind of script, here's Karen and John Bobie of Sunset Properties.
Point
Fabulous.
Central, no other way. We tried other locks and the Point Central locks blows all
We
the
did
other
a
companies.
test. We did, 6 of every one available.
And because we're at the very end of the island, we have limited internet. We have limited, as you know, cell service.
Access to teammates.
Exactly. And so therefore, and then you also have a harsh environment here with the salt water and the wind and, all that other good stuff out there. So we wanted to make sure that our locks stood up to the environment and that they were always pretty much, 90% ready to rock and roll and not losing,
And Point
connection.
Central won the competition.
Hands down. No connections lost.
Like we had attrition on the others in 3 months.
Attrition, literally the things were
Literally,
dying.
things didn't stop working.
I could not have said that any better myself. If you'd like to learn more about Point Central, head over to pointcentral.com/VRMB. They're now accepting property managers with less than 5 properties, which gives everybody the excuse to get a little bit more connected. And Breezeway, a property care and automation platform that solves the challenges of ensuring clean, safe, and high-quality properties in the wake of the pandemic. And instead of hyping Breezeway myself, here's Christina Thorenson of Chattanooga Vacation Rentals when I asked her what's the single technology shift that she considers most important to her business.
I think there are some folks on the property care housekeeping side that are doing some really cool stuff with confirming sanitization and disinfecting of properties. That I think where we're going to see technology with every housekeeper has a cell phone and they're checking into their system and checking out when they're done. They are taking pictures of the chemicals they're using and the spaces they've cleaned. And I think that is a technology shift. That's something that the guest might be able to access directly moving forward.
I like that. Let's give a shout out. Who you talking about right now?
Well, I see Jeremiah Gall in Breezeway does some really cool stuff with that. They're trying to do some things where they're incorporating that tech that's already available in the smartphone to help increase the guest's level of comfort, which I think is good.
I couldn't have said that any better myself. Head over to breezeway.io/VRMB, where you can do a free demo and secure free implementation if you decide to sign on. That's roughly a $1,000 value. That's breezeway.io/VRMB. Now let's get back to the show. I'm curious, so what you just described was kind of a difference of understanding between owners and managers, a difference of understanding between managers and Homeaway. I'm curious, with what you now know after all of those years, what is it about the listing site model that most professional owners and managers you think maybe don't understand or don't fully appreciate? Is there anything that you oftentimes say and they're like, wow, never thought of that?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to give a good answer to that, because you have to remember I've now been out of Homeaway for 5 years, so I don't have the benefit of all of the data that they have got. What I do think that our friends, my friend Brian Chesky, became a problem for the industry long before he became a participant in the industry, and I say that this with all due respect for Brian, who I like very much and value as a friend. It's that if property managers didn't understand owners, and if owners were angry with their property managers, everybody was angry about the guy who was just letting a guy who rents an apartment rent his back room. Right. And so I think that what folks didn't understand, owners, property managers, and the eventual host from Airbnb, is that a listing site is just trying to organize a marketplace. It's not trying Airbnb has moved in a different direction. Vrbo has moved in a different direction. But at the time, the first goal of a marketplace is to organize that marketplace, to make it easy to search, find, and transact. Mm-hmm. And that's what I don't think a lot of our owners understood about Homeaway, and that Brian Chesky understood in spades. Mm-hmm. Because by what he could do to make everything easy is he said to these owners who are hosts, who are very part-time at that point in time, go back to 2005, 6, 7, and 8, they didn't want to have credit card processing capabilities. They didn't do enough business to do that. Well, the average owner at Homeaway needed a credit card processing capability, but no credit card would let him do that easily, right? So you had to wait until parts of the antecedents, the things that make the industry what it is today, which is you can come in, find the property, book it, you can buy protection, and you can move on through and pick up your keys as or your key code as you're going into the house. That took a long time to organize. Mm-hmm. And I don't think our listings owners and the Airbnb host understood for a long time that we're not trying to build our brand to compete as a vacation rental. We're not trying to compete against the largest property managers on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, or we're not trying to be the largest property manager in Gulf Shores, Alabama. We want everybody in Gulf Shores, Alabama to advertise on Homeaway. We want you then, as an owner or a property manager, to provide the best experience you can provide. And over time, reviews are going to tell other travelers how good you do that. And this is all up to you. We are just the platform that introduces buyer to seller. That is changing. And evidence I saw of how the travel industry is changing, I just read this morning that Steve Hafner is going to start branding kayak hotels.
In my neighborhood here, in Miami Beach.
Totally bizarre.
I've already got a room booked.
Good for you. Tell Steve I said hi. The notion of going into competition against your suppliers is very interesting to me. And I think that through the early years of Homeaway, that was the fear that property managers had, is that we were somehow going to end run them and put them out of business with our power. And what they didn't understand is that marketplaces are valued by the market differently than property managers are valued. And that we wanted to stay in that software as a service valuation, which made Homeaway worth what it was worth. And we wouldn't have been worth nearly as much if we had said we're also a property manager.
So do you think that fear that you just talked about, which was unwarranted in that case, are there instances now when owners and managers may have that fear and it is real? Like we start to see Airbnb putting together their own vacation rental or property fleets, for instance, or even software companies that now have access to all the data that they could ever dream of from the best owners and managers in the world, who then have the potential to get into the actual property game. Are there areas of that power dynamic that people should be wary of?
I don't know that you need to be wary of it, because I think what Steve Hafner has done is just proved me wrong here. I think it'll be interesting to see how successful he is, but you have to also understand that with and I'm not trying to be mean, but kayak is not going to be a growth business anymore. Meta search is already plateaued a while back, and people are looking for ways to monetize that traffic differently. I think that Airbnb's decision, if to the extent that they make it to actually own properties, I would feel is ill-advised. I think it will build distrust between Airbnb as a organizer, and right now they have the advantage of being seen as a partner. You can't be a partner and a competitor.
Right. And I think that we've run into, I mean, we've hit that crossroad a couple of times over the past 6 months, when a lot of vacation rental professionals have really had to get serious and look at that relationship. And the word relationship is kind of what stands out to me, because I think a lot of the feelings towards OTAs, from owners and managers, it has to do with the fact that they've been with them for a long time, and that the general industry has changed. So, like, they used to pay I think I paid $250 for my VRBO annual subscription, and now you're telling me that I've got to give you 12% on every booking. How outrageous! The change in that relationship, it went from like emotional to what now is like very pragmatic business or transaction like. And I just think that maybe it's a natural thing to, if you're doing business with somebody for a really long time and one is adjusting and the other is stuck, there's an imbalance there, right?
In my view, what has driven that is just this industry grew in ways that we figured it was going to grow, but it outgrew even what we figured. Yeah, I tell people, and it's absolutely true, that we took, Brian and I took our business plan to the venture capitalist in 2004, after we had met with the guys for Cyber Rentals and the 4 companies, and said, we're changing it all out. We're just going to buy these guys. And we put together a 5-year business plan that generated the funds, that the $50 million that we needed in order to accomplish that business plan. We blew through that business plan within 14 months.
Wow.
Our 5-year goals were accomplished within 14 months.
Wow.
And that was because we had just gotten there at the absolute right time. Mm-hmm. Little interesting side note on that: when we sold to Expedia at the closing dinner, I was sitting next to Mark, who eventually became the CEO there for a while, and Mark had been the EVP of M&A for Expedia at the same time that I was out buying all the vacation rental businesses, and he said to me, "You got to VRBO." After I had lunch with Dave Klaus, and I went back and reported that I'd had a really great meeting. And the next day, I called him up, and he said he'd sold to you. And I said, I cannot understand. I could never understand what happened. And what happened was that Dave Klaus called me one afternoon, and he said, "Carl, are you still interested in buying VRBO?" And I said, "Yeah, Dave, I'm always interested in buying VRBO." And he said, "Well, if you'll pay X, I'll sell it to you." And I said, "Okay, Dave, I'll pay X." And I walked into Brian's office and said, "Brian, I've got great news. I just bought VRBO. And the problem is I'm paying this much money for it, and we don't have that much money. You need to polish up those pearly whites and go get me the money." So he went out and got me the money. But what Mark coming to Dave Klaus cemented in Dave Klaus's mind, this industry is about to change in a major way. And I would rather be with people who understood the vacation rental industry than trying to explain it. Mm. And I didn't understand that, because Dave never fessed up to me that Mark had closed on him until Mark had called him, until Mark told me, 10 years later. The point is, this industry is growing so quickly that an individual owner and an individual small property manager are seeing evolutions of business models spin. And what Airbnb proved to the vacation rental industry was that people would pay a percentage of the deal. Now, they were charging the traveler, right? They were their initial business model was that they only charge the credit card processing fee to the owner or the host. They charged the traveler for the actual transaction. We thought that would stay in place for a while, but ultimately, what we're all talking about is the take rate. And what I think small businesses, owners, and small property managers, and even large property managers need to know is that the take rate required to run Vervo today is so much higher than the take rate that was required in 2007.
And explain what a take rate is real quick.
The take rate is the percentage of a transaction that you take as revenue.
Got it.
Okay, so when we were charging you a subscription fee, if you only booked twice a year, that $250 was quite a high take rate, if you follow me.
Mm-hmm.
But if you booked 52 weeks a year, that take rate was infinitesimally small.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, and we had just come in to this industry with this viewpoint. Everyone wants to make vacation rentals like an OTA. They want to take 25% of the booking. That was what everybody wanted to do. That's what Booking.com wanted to do. That's what Expedia wanted to do. And at the time, there were others, Orbitz. There were all sorts of people out there. They've all consolidated down. But we looked at it and said, our owners can't afford 25% because when you're talking about someone's vacation home, if you're going to say on $1,000 week that you want $250 of that to come for you for getting the booking, many vacation homeowners will just say, that's okay, I don't need to rent.
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't need to rent at that time. The other characteristic that is changing, Matt, that's driving what your point of view about what's happening is that Homeaway and Airbnb then grew the market. People who hadn't considered having a vacation home, in our case, in the case of Homeaway, started going out to buy vacation homes, thinking, okay, I can rent this on Homeaway and I can help pay for it. That just means more and more people were coming into this industry every year. When we started Homeaway, Gaylord had just published the only public report we had ever seen about the industry. And they said the size of the U.S. market for vacation homes was about 250,000 homes. And Brian and I looked at each other and said, with the growth rate of our companies that we're buying, we don't know how many there are because there's been no study, but it's not 250,000. Because we already had 40,000 listings. And we didn't think we were that deeply penetrated. And in fact, the last study that we did before I left showed that in the US and Europe, there were 6 million homes that were available for 2 weeks or more a year.
Wow.
So that's what's driving the business model, because now a listing site has to come in and say, how do I serve my traveler? I can't just make him go through 6 million listings. I have to start saying, what do I do to get the best properties in front of him at the right time? And one of the ways that you do that is to say, who is my better partner? Who pays me more money? Because they do it more often. A guy that's renting 52 times a year at a weekly rate is a better customer than a guy who only rents 5 times a year. And therefore, that 52-year guy is going to pay more because he needs to make more money than the other guy is, right? So the listing models have all changed to accommodate the extraordinary explosion we had in vacation rental, home ownership, and rental, exacerbated by the idea that at Airbnb, you didn't even have to own it. You could just rent an apartment and put it on Airbnb. It was still competition.
So what's your instinct in terms of where we're at? Well, at what point in the curve are we at in the broader timeline of vacation rentals? Because a lot of folks who have, let's say, been using VRBO for the last 15 years, they might feel like we're at, a saturated point or like it's been forever. Whereas others just getting started say, wow, this is a brand new sector. It's just, beginning. What's your instinct in terms of where we're at right now in that trajectory?
I think that the pandemic has, I think we have to look at 2020 and say we don't know what 2020 means in either direction. There are some indications you can look at. that as you probably well understand, that the vacation rental industry and the RV industry fared very well in the pandemic, whereas hotels and Airbnb did not fare as well as Verbo, simply because their inventory is largely in cities, right? Now, your question is a very good question. What is happening? When I retired, I gave an interview and I said that the next 5 years were the revenge of the property manager. And by that, I meant that there's now so much inventory out there and you have to be so Johnny on the spot. You need to respond to your inquiries. You need to get your booking done. The casual booker or owner or host, depending on what phrase you like to have, who takes hours to respond and confirm a booking, is going to lose that booking. So over the last 5 years, you've seen not only on Verbo but also on Airbnb, organized large property managers won out. I think we can all know that that's true. And they won out because they are staffed for that sort of high volume activity. I think individual homeowners on the vacation rental side are unhappy with their options again. So in a way, you're back to 2004, where I'm unhappy with the only option that was available to me was a property manager, or I could do it myself. And I did it myself and I made just as much money as with a property manager. Now we've come to 2021, and I think a large number of property owners, I'm not talking about the Airbnb arbitrage model, but the vacation rental home ownership model, I believe there's disruption possible of the large players because those homeowners are unhappy and the experience is getting homogenized.
And when you say homogenized, you're referring to the big box vacation rental managers that are more or less offering kind of commodity, generic experiences, the polar opposite of the unique personality of a single home?
Correct. When I go on a vacation, I used to love to rent for owners because what I got to see was something that was a slice of their life. They loved this property. This was something that they had invested in, and they loved it. And the reason I didn't like professionally managed properties is that the professionally managed properties to me were always just a little off. The carpet was dirty. They hadn't changed the couch out, and it was a little saggy. And the reason they didn't do it is that they told their owner to update the house, and the owner didn't do it. Well, when you're using your own vacation home and you don't like the way the chair sits, you go out and buy a new chair when you're using it yourself. So that's what I liked about the owners.
Pay attention to what Carl's about to say here. It represents one of the most impactful and yet counterintuitive trends we've observed in defining your magic zone, and it's all about quality control.
I believe property managers have gotten to where you were talking about brand earlier. I don't think that you can be the type of property managers that we had in 2010 in 2021. And that is that you've got to start firing owners. If an owner doesn't have the house to your standards, even if you can rent it, you shouldn't be renting it because it goes against your brand.
Or if they're not willing to adhere to your rules, or if they're just a headache to work with.
I'm an old man. I'm a headache to work with. I'm thinking more if that unit doesn't show, I'm on the board of Turnkey, so I should be quite clear about that as I say something nice about Turnkey. We fire people. Mm-hmm. If the property isn't maintained like we need it to be maintained, we fire you. And it's not because you can't find someone to represent you. It's that we don't want someone having a radically different experience from one turnkey property to the other. That sounds great, doesn't it? It does eliminate individuality, right?
There's also this other thing that's happening, which is technology, which is enabling these single property owners to achieve unbelievable results that were never even imaginable. Even a couple years ago, whether it's revenue management tools or housekeeping and maintenance apps or smart home automation. This is giving sort of this new kind of power to what might be a revenge of the owners. But what does that revenge of the owners look like? Does it just mean they take their properties back from the management company and either manage it themselves or take it off the market?
Well, I think it could be a combination of all three. I think the revenge of the owners doesn't happen until a platform emerges that lets them showcase themselves. And, to one of the things I've been noting in the press about what Chesky is saying, and he and I have not talked about it. We text from time to time, but we don't chat very often. But my observation is that he's going back to his roots. If you look at his television ads, he's really going back to say, we grew best and we provided the best, our best service under this world of a host who is unique and different and valued. And the thing that we bring to the table as Airbnb is we give an umbrella for that host who couldn't really brand him or herself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where he's going. Homeaway was going in that direction for a long time. But homeowners are fiercely independent. They didn't want to be seen as a Homeaway only house, right? Whereas people are perfectly happy to advertise only on Airbnb and let them do all the work. Homeowners had to do all the work of checking you in, blah, 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 blah. The notion is what's going to happen in the future is that you've now got an industry that's so large, it's naive of us to think that it isn't going to further fragment, meaning and specialize and become niche-y. I see a future where there are going to be websites and organizing principles that let like-minded homeowners group together.
Hey listener, this is one of our longer interviews, so we've decided to break it into 2 parts for easy listening. If you haven't already, hit subscribe on your podcast app to get part 2 when it's released next week, when we'll actually get into the mechanics of how independent owners and managers should best position themselves to thrive in the next few years. If you'd like a full transcript of today's part 1 conversation with resource links, head over to VRMB Communities, where the world's most creative vacation rental professionals are collaborating under one virtual roof. That's community.vrmb.com.
Wondering why this feels like home.
Like a Tennessee river in the morning takes your breath without a warning.
Feels like home.
Like smoke rising up from the mountains, all the beauty surrounds.
Feels like home.
Like Elvis and Dolly singing a melody that's bringing you home. 'Cause it feels like home.
Feels like